Okay, so just going to quickly have a look at the brief unit assignment, and so you can see there you'll need to use some sort of 3D model of a vehicle, at least as a reference in your design, and so you may use the part of the 3D model, or you maybe just will need it there as a 3D reference, and so it's going to be really important to have that available to you in a 3D format. And so the first step will be to source it, and you've got a few different sites you can use to do that, probably just by searching for the thing you're looking for, and then model, so barge in this case, or barge 3D model, and I've put free after it because I don't want to pay. And so you could search for almost any 3D object, apart from trucks and barges and planes. Is there anything else anyone's thought about using as their vehicle? Trains, yep, that's a good one. You'll find lots. There are train fanatics, really obsessed people out there who spend their whole life looking at trains, and so it's the same with 3D. There are lots of people who do model. I used to be kind of interested. I was never a fanatic, but I did look at these a little bit in the past, and so I've modelled some fairly detailed parts of trains, and so that can be an interesting thing to look at as well. They're quite interesting geometry, and so I'll download one of those as well. Okay, so don't pay for them unless you really have to, because you should be able to find reasonable free models. Yeah, and so so there are certain formats to look out for. The carriage, how do you spell carriage? C-A-R-R-I-A-G-E? Yeah, it just doesn't look right, but that's right, isn't it? Okay, so so the format here you can see is 3ds. That's always good. That's kind of the default format for all 3D models with almost any program. It's the original 3D Studio format, but it's become almost the ubiquitous format for 3D nowadays, like DWG or DXF is for CAD. SketchUp, though, works as well, so SKP is also good. And then Max, MAX, is the 3ds Max format. That's always good as well. And then, of course, DWG, the AutoCAD format, also works well. And so you'll see then, if I go to, in 3ds Max, on the main menu, choose Import, and then Import again from the sub-menu there, I can actually show you all the formats it can import. Right, so you can see there are a lot of different formats that it will read. And that's very different to Revit. If I just compare that to what you'll have with Revit, I'm going to make a new file using the architectural template. And then you'll see, if you try to import a 3D model into Revit using Import CAD, you have a much more limited range of formats it can read. It can actually read SketchUp files, but don't rely on that, because when you bring a SketchUp file into Revit, it'll behave a little bit unpredictably. Sometimes it'll work well. In other cases, it'll come in with the materials set, but then you won't have the option of adjusting the materials. And then very occasionally, you will have it set up so that you can adjust the materials. In other instances, it just will come in with the geometry only and no materials, and you then have no way of assigning the materials. So even though they have the SketchUp option there in Revit, I don't think it's all that useful. And so essentially, when you bring a 3D model into Revit, you have to use the DWG format, the AutoCAD format. So what I'm showing you is how you can get your 3D models set up to work in AutoCAD. I'm going to start AutoCAD as well. And once you've got them working in AutoCAD, then you can easily bring them into Revit. So I'm going to make a blank file in AutoCAD as well, using, okay, let's just check again, because it's been a little while since you've used AutoCAD. Which format should you use in AutoCAD? Which template? Yeah? No, definitely not. No, that's the problem. That AutoCAD template is set up for metric, for imperial I mean. It has a few options added for metric, but it is an imperial template. So it's set up for feet and inches primarily. This one here is set up just for metric, AutoCAD ISO. Yeah, so ISO means International Standards Organisation, and the rest of the world apart from America is metric pretty much. So when you see ISO, it's usually a good indication that it's metric. If you don't see ISO, it's usually imperial. Okay, so try to always use that template with AutoCAD, or you're going to be creating work for yourselves. And it's a common issue. I've seen people who've used AutoCAD for decades who use that incorrect template all the time and then have to go and change all these things to make it go from imperial to metric. Okay, so back into 3ds Max. I'm going to import from that folder that I've made for you on the P drive, 3D models, and you can see I've downloaded a few different 3D models. So the, sorry, no, that's not the one. So the truck, I haven't done this one before, but no, I'll start with the one I've done before. This shuttle is a 3D model of the space shuttle. So I've just chosen the file called shut, which I'm assuming has the whole thing in it, but we'll have a look in a moment and find out. And then you get the option to either merge or completely replace. It's usually best to choose merge, and then you can try leaving this convert units option on and see what happens. It doesn't always work properly, but all you can do is try. So I'm going to click OK. And then you get an option asking about the animation length. You're not going to be doing much animation here, so you can just say no there. And so you can see then that it's imported the model of the main body of the shuttle, but not all of it. So I'm going to go back to import again, and you can see there are other 3ds files in that folder. So I'm going to just import those in the same way, using the same option each time. So you can see it's added now something. It's added one of the doors, basically. And you'll get an idea why these are separate in a moment. So back to import again. And you'll often find them like this. You'll get them in parts. So that's got the other door there. So I'm going to select those two doors because I know the next part is behind the doors. So I'm just with Control selecting those two doors. I'm going to right click, hide selection, so I can see inside that, whatever it is, shuttle bay again. So I'm going to go back to import again, and then engine is the next one. So that's imported this part here that goes inside, and then back to import, and the last part, the RCS. So that's another part that goes inside that. So those things may not be even that important. So I can delete those. It's just investigating to find out what they are, and then if I right click I can unhide all and bring back those doors. Okay, so I've got the model there, and if I go back and have a look in that folder, I think I've imported everything now. Yep. And so then you can see that it doesn't look all that detailed, and if I look in that folder, you can see that there are other files in this textures folder that should be coming up. So I'm going to find out what's happening with those by going to the material editor, and then I can use the eyedropper to pick individual pieces and see how the materials have been set up. So you can see here materials have been assigned, and they should be using those textures. So I'm going to see if they can find them. I'm going to go to a material that should have a texture. So we'll just see if I go through. If that one doesn't, let's go to the next one. Keep going. So I can find one that has a texture. There we are. So there's a material that has a texture. I can see with the M on that button there. So I'm going to click on this button with the checkerboard, and that should show the texture in the viewport. It doesn't appear to be making a huge amount of difference. So now I'm going to see if it can find that texture. I'm going to click on the M and then click View Image, and you can see there that isn't doing anything, so in other words it can't find the texture. So I'm going to try and get Max to find all of the textures using the Customize menu. I'm going to go to Configure User Paths, go to External Files, and then just click Add. So this is fairly standard with Max when you have a folder that has a group of textures in it. You can just add that whole folder, and I'll show you the same option you have in Revit as well. So I'm going to find the spatial modelling, 3D models, shuttle, textures. Okay, so that way I don't have to go and pick every single one of these files. So first I go Use Path, and now if I go back and try and find that, now I can find the texture. Okay, and then if I toggle these on and off, you can maybe see it's going to be funny with this one because some of these might be inside, but I'll just go through and try toggling all of these on. Let's go back. Here we go. Okay, so you can see these are starting to bring up the detail that it should be there in the model. And a lot of these 3D models, they're made by people who do 3D for a living, and so they'll do a lot of things with textures that you might think you would do with modelling. So I'm just cycling through here all these materials. I'll do a quick render. I'm not going to make you watch me do all of them, but you can see then we're getting some of the detail coming up. Now, to do all of this, you would have to pick each part of that geometry and go through all of these materials, which will take a little bit of time. Like I said, I won't do all of it now, but I'm just going to maybe do that door as well. That should do it. So let's see if I render now. Not that much better, but you can see we've got the side there as well. Right, so it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. And so now to bring that into Revit, firstly, just so that I can get back to this Max file and maybe keep working on it if I need to, I'm going to save the Max version. So I'm going to call this Space Shuttle. And then on the main menu, export, and you can export to Autocad Dwg format. So make sure you know where it's going. So again here, sorry, not that folder. There we are. Okay, and you can use this method to get any 3D model into Revit. This is, you'll see how a lot of the families in Revit have been set up by getting something from a 3D program into AutoCAD format. So now I can go and open that file in AutoCAD. There it is. So you can see it there, and you can see that it's actually side on. Now I could have fixed it in AutoCAD, sorry, in 3ds Max, but because you're probably more familiar with AutoCAD, you might find it easier to fix it there. And so then you should really, if you're going to use it in Revit, also think about the layers. So anyhow, those things you can do as you work on your project, because the nice thing about AutoCAD when you bring it into Revit is you can have it linked instead of doing an import. So for now I'm just going to do a save as, and so it was the same name actually, I'm just going to leave it like that, and then I'm going to go into Revit and then insert and then link CAD. So that's all there is to it. So a lot of this is just changing the formats. You don't really need to know much about the programs. You just need to be able to open files with them. And then you might find, when you've done all that work, that there is still a major problem that you'll have to resolve. So, apart from the materials, what else do you think could be not right? If the model looks okay, but maybe if you're just looking at the grid or trying to work out how big this is in relation to other things. What about the size? So how do you know how big it is?
Measure it.
Exactly. So you can measure it in AutoCAD, you can measure it in Max, or you can measure it in Revit. So here, 34 metres, roughly, is way too small. I'd say it would almost definitely be a lot bigger than that. So you can look up the dimensions of something like Spatial and see what the size is. And you can do that with almost anything. So for something like this, NASA would give you, I'm sure, dimensions down to a millimetre. Oh, there it is, yep. And okay, so it's 56 metres high. Well, here you go, the diameter is 8.7 metres. And doesn't give the length by the look of it. It is in there somewhere, I've read it before. But anyhow, that'll be enough. So 8.7 metres across, so maybe that's not too far off actually. Let's see. No, okay, so a bit too small. If we look at it from the elevation, yes, it's a bit too small. Okay, so have you tried scaling anything in Revit before? Okay, and unfortunately, it's just one of those things that has never worked and never will work all that well in Revit, just because of the type of program Revit is. It's object-based, so they want you to define things with parameters and not just change the scale in a generic or in an arbitrary way. So here you can see there is a scale button, but it's disabled, and it's a deliberate decision. They deliberately do not give you that option because this type of object should be the right size. That's the way they think Revit should be set up. So to change that, you need to go back to the file it's coming from. So it's a linked file. So I'd need to either change it in AutoCAD or alternatively do that in Max before I export it. And I'll show you the two different approaches. In AutoCAD, you have the scale tool. You can scale anything, but you can only scale evenly. You can only scale uniformly in all directions, X, Y, and Z. So that probably for a 3D model isn't such a bad option. So I'll just make 0,0 our base point, and I need to make this roughly about a third bigger. So it's about 10/6, something like that. Oh no, sorry, it was maybe 9/6, something like that. Okay, so that's an easy way of scaling evenly. One of the advantages with 3ds Max that you don't have with either of those programs, though, is the ability to scale non-uniformly. So I'll show you this with some of the other models, probably it'll be even more useful. But it's going to be interesting if you see a model like this even. So I can scale just Z or just X. So I can make a shorter version. Oops. Right, so can you see how that can be really useful with some things? So the ability to scale non-uniformly is extremely useful for making variations on the original model. And there is actually a way of doing that in AutoCAD. If you need to scale something non-uniformly, there's a bit of a trick you can use to do that in AutoCAD as well, but I'll show you that afterwards. Okay, but anyhow, that's the basic method, going from 3ds Max into AutoCAD and then AutoCAD into Revit. So because this is linked, I can just save this file now, back into Revit, and I can go to the Manage tab, Manage Links, CAD Formats, choose the file, reload, click OK. Okay, it's a little bit slow, but it should get there in the end. Okay, there we are. Okay, so that's bigger. Rotating this in Revit probably would work pretty well, except that it's pinned, so I'll unpin it and then I'll try that again. Okay, but what if you want several of these? What if you want several copies of the 3D model that you've imported from AutoCAD in your Revit file? What other option do you think you could use when you bring it into Revit? I'll show you with the next one. Well, yeah, you have a problem because if you copy this, then you'd have to go and edit each one separately, and it can be more difficult to manage. So I'll show you there's another way of importing it. So I'm going to reset, and then I'll try one of these other models. Okay, so going back to the models I've downloaded, you can see that we've got a this Mustang model, fighter plane from World War II, P-51, which is fortunately in 3ds Max format. So that's the best, if you can find that. So here we are, .max. Now, it is the best option, the best format, but you will often get this option, or this window coming up. When you see this, don't panic. It just means the person who's made this has used V-Ray at some point. And it's by far my favourite engine. I use it all the time as well. We just don't use it in here. So if you choose open, it will still open the file, and I'm going to say yes. Oh no, sorry, if you get a message about Gamma and LUT, in fact probably just say no. And then here it's asking about textures that are missing. So remember, I've mapped that folder that had my shuttle textures in it. So I'm simply going to copy these textures. There are only 3 of them. I'm going to copy them into the folder with the shuttle textures. And I'll maybe move all of these together to another folder later on. But I'm just going to use that folder for now. It still can't find them, and they actually have different names. So let's see if they have similar names. And you'll find this is often the case when people make their own 3D models. They give things unusual names, or sometimes I'll just give you the model without the textures. And in this case, yeah, that's what they've done. They maybe correspond, but we can't really know for sure. So we'll just have to continue. I'll hit browse and see if it helps, but no. So by hitting browse, you can just refresh that list. Sometimes it'll find the textures, but in this case, I'm just going to hit continue. And you can see then it's brought in those parts of the geometry, but it's not going to render. If I try to render that, black. So really good trick there. Just to see how it will work in 3D is to go to render setup, choose mental array. Just going to try clicking render there and see what happens. Probably won't work all that well. So then I'm going to go to the Processing tab. I'm going to bring up my material editor and then just make a mental array material. Double clicking on Arc and Design there. So I made a new mental array material. I'm going to set the reflectivity to 0. So it's a matte grey material. I'm going to tick the enable option for material override and just drag this option over, drag that material over onto that, that slot there. Now I'll try rendering again. And there we are. So you can see it's now rendering all the geometry there, and I can see it's working. So that model would work well, but again, I would have to spend some time setting up the materials if I want those. And so really the process I'm trying to get you used to here is basically organising and making the things you download work properly for you, because they've been made by other people to work with the software they use and the resources they have, but that won't always be the case when you're working with a different setup. So I'm just going to save this again as a 3ds Max file with the changes that I've put in. Now, like I said, you can measure in 3ds Max. So it's one of those options that's really useful, but it's not as easy to find as in Revit or AutoCAD. It's on the Tools menu, and then you can just choose Measure Distance. Sorry. Yeah. So, okay, so if you choose Measure Distance, then you need to double click and then click. So double click to set the first point, click to set the second point. And then the measurement comes up in this little panel down the bottom left, and you can see there it is, 988. And I'll do that again just to show you. So Tools, Measure Distance, double click, and then click. So 991. So that's not telling us much. So I'm going to maybe try an area that is easier to relate to. We can see in there, there's the seat. Okay, so there's the seat the pilot would sit on. How big do you think that would be? Yeah, well, we could. Yeah, the legs, that's a bit harder to see, and that they would probably have different space for that anyway to what you have normally. But then what about the backrest? That would maybe be, what, a little bit more than a metre? Yeah. So I'm going to try measuring that. So back to measure distance. So you can see that's 91 mil. So let's see if that is inches. Okay, so 91 times 25.4 gives us 2.3. So that's not really going to help much. That's 2 metres, which is probably a little bit too big. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Customise menu and then Unit Setup. So we know it's probably not inches, it could be centimetres, but 91, that's maybe not enough. Well, might be just, but 91, it's about that much. So yeah, it's probably a little bit tight. I mean, these might have been small planes, you never know, but let's just see. So if I go to metric and then millimetres for display units and check the system units, and you can see they're inches. So I'll go back and measure again. So measure distance. So there you can see it's, well, actually that is right. So yeah, it's in inches. So 2, 3, so that's 2 metres. That seems pretty big. So the person would be, oh yeah, that could be right. Yep, okay, so that's probably about the right size. If you do need to scale though, I just want to show you quickly, you can always select everything with a window and then right click on the scale button. and then you can type in a percentage. Okay, so if I want it to be 50% of the size, I can just type 50 over here on the right. And it's really important that you get the size right before trying to bring that into Revit, because again, you can't scale it in Revit. So again here, save the file, and then I'm going to go to export, export again, and as always, DWG format. Okay, so what do you think this might be useful for apart from the vehicles that you're importing? So I get people in the design and decoration courses in first year quite often actually asking about this. For other things that they would be using all the time, especially decoration, you might think they don't do much complex 3D modelling, but think about what they need to put into their spaces. Furniture, exactly. They do a lot more furnishings and small decorative pieces as well. You don't want to be modelling those. And I see people create so much work for themselves trying to model furniture and sculptures and other little things like that, knickknacks for shelves and books and things, which you should never be modelling. You don't want to be wasting time on that. Yeah, so? That's right, it's already done by other people. So why not use that resource? And they're not things you would ever design anyway. You're just going to be sourcing them from another place. So you can easily download those, but you're not going to get them in Revit format usually. So you need to bring them into a program like this and use this method to save them as an Autocad file before then bringing them into Revit. But the other thing I'm going to show you, instead of just bringing them straight into a project folder, what you can do in Revit is also try importing them into a family folder, or sorry, a family file. So if you just go and make a new family first, and here, when you're making families, have you been using any particular template here? Okay, so by now you should probably be starting to make your own families in Revit. You can't really do much customised design if you're not making your own families. So you need to start looking at that. And so here you can see we've got all these different templates, and that can be a little bit daunting at first because you won't know which one to choose. So if you're not sure, just use metric generic model. That's a good all-round template that will work with almost anything. Yep, metric generic model, and so it's a blank template with nothing in it, which makes it easier to use. I'm just going to go to the Insert tab and then choose Import CAD, and I can bring in that file. I'm going to leave all the options here on default. Click Open. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter because it's going to come in as we're using it as a 3D model, and so it'll have materials. Okay, so I've got this plane working as a family, and that means I can save it as a family file. And I'm just going to call it the same thing, Mustang airplane. And now I can load that into my project. Put a few of them around. Okay, so the advantage of working this way is that if I change one of them, they'll all change. So instead of just using that as a reference, I might want that to have materials so that I can render parts of it. And so to do that, I'd need to modify it in Autocad. At the moment, it's just set up the way it was in 3ds Max. So how do I assign materials to the different parts of it in Revit? Yep, so if I go to Edit Type, nothing there. Yep, no. Okay, so the key to it is modifying it in AutoCAD. If I go to Edit Family, that'll take me to the file it's come from, but even there, if I select that object, because it's an AutoCAD object, there's no option for materials. And you'll find this with a lot of families you'll download as well, and even families in the library. you'll need to set up materials yourself. So back into AutoCAD, and I'm going to open that file, and I can see if I select it, firstly it's a block. It's all one thing. So if I right click and go to properties, it's telling me it's actually a mesh. So I need to explode that, and then I can select the individual parts and put them onto different layers. And it's not as hard as you might think, because you can just orbit to get the different views you might need to select it. And so then if I look at the layers here, there are only 2 layers, so I need to go and make my own. So this might be, what is it, windshield really? Oops. Okay, so then you can put these parts onto their own layer. So that's how you need to set things up to work in Revit. If you've brought it in as an AutoCAD file, okay, so I'll just do this part that's glass. There we go. So if you're not using AutoCAD regularly, these things might be difficult, and you'll find that, in fact, a lot of the more involved areas in Revit rely on using AutoCAD. So if you're not very good with AutoCAD, you're never going to get beyond basic level with Revit. I'm sorry to say, that's just the way it is. So you need to know AutoCAD to use Revit beyond very basic level. Okay, so I've made this glass part a separate layer, save the file, back into Revit, and I'll delete that model that I imported previously. There's no other way because I can't link into a family file. So back to import, insert CAD, and then I can just import the new version just with everything on default. It's fine. Okay, so then this is the really interesting part. I can now set a material to that glass. The way you do it is by going to the Manage tab and then Object Styles. So Object Styles is one of those menus that maybe won't seem all that important at first until you realise this is basically Revit's layers. So sometimes people think Revit doesn't have layers, but it does. They're just called Object Styles, and they're basically managed for you at the beginning. But once you start using the program a bit more, you'll need to modify them. And so there you've got model objects, annotation objects, and then under imported objects, there's my windshield layer. So that's how you assign materials to things that have been imported from AutoCAD. You need to set a layer for them in AutoCAD, and then you can easily assign a Revit material. So there we are. So notice how now that's transparent because it's got a layer, a material in Revit. Okay, so then I can just load that back into my project file, and then notice how all of them change. I don't need to go and edit each one. And this is an important concept with all of your modelling in Revit, because if you're not managing things in families, then you often find if you're using model in place for everything, which is the equivalent to importing directly into a project, you find you're going and changing all of these models individually, which takes hours instead of just doing it for one and propagating that. Okay, so if I go to realistic now, you can see again, transparent. Okay, so then the final one is 3ds format. So I'll just show you that one very quickly and give you some time to try this. But again, I'm going to reset, import, and oops. So again, 3ds format, absolutely fine. So that one's probably the best of the lot. That model there from Archive 3D, like I said, they're sometimes not the best, but this one's fantastic. So,
Is that the truck?
Yep.
Straight liner?
Yep. So if I go to render, that's pretty well broken up for materials. Okay, so I can then bring back my other viewports and do a quick measurement to see what the size is. So it is 352 metres, which is obviously too big. So this is again common when you work with 3D files, and look, the worst thing that's ever happened for 3D is America not going with the metric system. The world would be a different place if they had done that, but unfortunately that's just the way it is, so we have to account for that. So if it's 352 metres, again, you'll need to do a quick calculation to work out the scale, and a common number that you should be hopefully getting used to using when you're thinking about scaling is the number of millimetres to an inch, 25.4. So I'm going to try that. 352 metres divided by 25.4 gives me 13 metres. That is probably right for the length of a semi-trailer. I'm just going to do another one to check. So, do you know the width of a car? How wide is a car normally? Well, how wide's a car space? You should know that one. A bit more than 2, yeah, 2.4. 2.4, 2.5. Okay, so that's a dimension. 2.4 or 2.5 by 5.4 is a standard car space, which you'll need to remember for design. And so if I do measure distance here, it should fit within, maybe it'll be a bit larger than normal car space, but that's the sort of measurement we're thinking of. So it's 64 metres at the moment. It should be about 2.5, maybe a little bit more. So 64,000, let's do it in millimetres this time, divided by 25.4, 2.5. Okay, so you need to do a bit of investigation and try to work out what the scaling is. So here, like I said, we know that common issue with things being done in inches when you want them in millimetres. So to go backwards the other way, if I want to make it go down to millimetres and divide it by 25.4, does anyone want to be brave and guess the scale factor? So it's easy when you're going up. When you want to make it into millimetres, or sorry, into inches from millimetres, you multiply it by 25.4. But going the other way is a bit trickier. So we need to try dividing 1 divided by 25.4. Okay, and that equals 0.3937, whatever. Believe it or not, this is something you need to do all the time because most content is made by Americans. They made all of the software that makes everything 3D, and so of course most of the people who make the content are over in America. There are more around the other parts of the world now, but even they often work in inches because it's all come from America. So you've got to get used to this. So I can just copy that to the clipboard from the calculator and then paste it into here, into the percentage. Now I'll just make it a bit easier for you. That is a decimal. If I want that to be a percentage, what would I need to do? So remember I did 1 divided by 25.4 to get this number. That's what the scale factor would be as a decimal. In other words, as a part of 1. So what would you do to make it into a percentage? Yeah, exactly, multiply it by 100, yeah. Okay, so that's the percentage. So I'll copy that number instead. and then I can just paste that in here to the percentage. So remember how I got this up? Yeah, right clicking on the scale button, and then I can paste the number in, and here we are. So it's become a lot smaller, but I can be sure now that's the right size. And if I go and measure, using measure distance again, there we are, so 2.6 metres across. So that's right. Alright, so I'm going to save that as max file. Now, I could spend some more time on the materials, but for now I won't. I'll just go back into AutoCAD. So again, export. And again, rather than importing directly into a project, make a new family. It will save you a lot of work. And then import your CAD models into that. Okay, so this will work for all kinds of things, furniture particularly. So if you find those chairs on the Knoll website, I think some of them are in Revit, but a lot of them aren't, and a lot of other furniture you'll find is 3ds format or AutoCAD 3D. You can use this to get them into Revit. Okay, it's a little bit slow, but it should get there in the end. That's the problem. The better models are going to be bigger files, which means there's a lot more in them and it'll take longer. Okay, so I might finish it there. I'll just let that one keep going, but hopefully that should give you enough to be able to bring any 3D model into Revit. As long as it's in one of those formats you can bring into 3ds Max. I didn't show you the SketchUp one, but you should use the same approach for SketchUp models as well. But that's going to take a little while, so I'll just leave that going. I want to show you massing afterwards as well, so I'll do that later, but I'll give you some time just to try that.